In the serene suburbs of Willow Creek, Virginia, where morning strolls were as common as the sunrise, an unexpected visitor made quite the entrance. It wasn't a new neighbor, but a bobcat kitten, tiny with adorable tufted ears and an incredibly bold spirit. Instead of cowering, he greeted every person he encountered, captivating the entire community. Everyone affectionately called him Sparky and showered the little bobcat with treats. To most, he was merely a harmless, charming wildcat. But to Mr. Ethan Hayes, a man with a keen eye, Sparky's friendly chirps hid a subtle, profound desperation that others seemed to overlook. When Ethan decided to follow the kitten's mysterious trail, he stumbled upon a heartbreaking secret. Where was this tiny creature going with all the food? The truth once unveiled would be far more shocking and emotionally devastating than anyone could have ever imagined. Willow Creek, nestled in the picturesque rolling hills of Northern Virginia, was a place where time seemed to slow down. Manicured lawns seamlessly blended into the untamed edges of the Shenandoah woods, and its residents, a mix of young families and comfortable retirees, cherished the quiet predictability of their lives. Mr. Ethan Hayes, at 72 years old, was a prime example. His days were perfectly structured by a gentle, unwavering routine: coffee on the porch at dawn, the crossword puzzle by mid-morning, and a slow, contemplative walk through the neighborhood in the late afternoon. It was during one of these walks, bathed in the hazy golden light of a late September day, that his routine was abruptly shattered. As Ethan rounded the corner onto Sycamore Lane, a street that bordered the dense forest line, he noticed a small flicker of movement near the curb. It wasn't a squirrel or a chipmunk. Their frenetic energy was quite familiar to him. This was something entirely different, slower, more deliberate. He paused, leaning lightly on the handsome oak cane his late wife Eleanor had given him. There, sitting with an almost regal composure on the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the road, was a kitten. But it was no ordinary house cat. Its coat was a mesmerizing tapestry of dappled browns and soft grays, its paws a little too large for its body and its ears. The undeniable giveaway were tipped with distinct black tufts. It was a bobcat, a baby no bigger than a shoebox, yet undeniably a wild creature. Ethan froze, a jolt of concern coursing through him. A bobcat this close to homes was highly unusual, and one this young, completely alone, was a stark sign that something was terribly wrong. He expected it to bolt the second it saw him, to vanish back into the deep shadows of the woods just 50 yards away. Instead, the kitten tilted its head, fixed him with wide, intelligent eyes, and let out a soft, inquisitive chirp. It was a sound utterly at odds with the fierce predator it would one day become. It took a tentative step towards him, then another. It stopped about 10 feet away, sat back on its haunches, and simply watched him, its tiny tufted ears swiveling to catch the rustle of leaves in the afternoon breeze. Ethan was utterly mesmerized. He had lived in Willow Creek for 40 years and had only ever caught fleeting, ghostly glimpses of adult bobcats at the furthest edge of his property, always at dusk, always disappearing in a heartbeat. This felt like a sacred violation of an unspoken rule between their two worlds. He stood there for a full 5 minutes, a silent observer in this strange, captivating tableau. Finally, the kitten seemed to grow bored. It gave a dismissive flick of its stubby tail, turned, and trotted nonchalantly along the curb before disappearing into Mrs. Gable's prize-winning azalea bushes. Ethan continued his walk, his mind buzzing. Where was its mother? A mother bobcat would be fiercely protective. She would never let her kitten wander into the open like this, let alone approach a human. He scanned the tree line, a prickle of unease on his neck, half expecting to see a pair of angry yellow eyes watching him from the shadows. He saw nothing but the dense tangle of oaks and hickories. The next day, the kitten was there again. This time it was playfully batting at a fallen maple leaf on the sidewalk. When Ethan approached it, repeated its performance, chirping a greeting and watching him with that same unnerving curiosity. This time, Ethan spoke to it. "You're a long way from home, little fellow," he murmured, his voice soft. "You ought to be more careful." The kitten, of course, didn't understand. It just blinked slowly, as if considering his words before pouncing on the leaf again. Soon the bobcat kitten became a neighborhood fixture. The Miller kids, who lived 2 houses down from Ethan, were the first to give it a name, Sparky, for the reddish tinge in its spotted coat. They were utterly fascinated and would watch from their porch, their parents having sternly warned them not to get any closer. Mrs. Gable, whose azaleas had become Sparky's preferred daytime lounge, was a nervous wreck at first. "Ethan, it's a wild animal," she'd exclaimed, wringing her hands as she stood by her mailbox. "It's not right. What if it has rabies?" "He's just a baby," Ethan had reassured her, "and he looks perfectly healthy, just lost." But as the days turned into a week, lost started to seem like a permanent condition. Sparky's boldness grew exponentially. He would trot out to greet the mailman's truck, sitting and watching patiently as if expecting a delivery of his own. He would follow joggers for a few yards, his gait a clumsy, adorable mimicry of their rhythm. People would stop their cars to stare, pulling out their phones to capture pictures of the tiny, tufted-eared celebrity of Sycamore Lane. The community's initial fear softened into a kind of collective gentle custody. Someone left a bowl of water out. Another person, after seeing Sparky expertly pounce on and devour a field mouse, started leaving out small scraps of leftover chicken. Ethan himself was guilty of this, once tearing a piece from his turkey sandwich and tossing it onto the grass. Sparky had devoured it with a gratitude that felt profoundly, heartbreakingly real. But Ethan's fascination was increasingly shadowed by a deep, nagging worry. He was a practical man, a retired engineer, who understood systems and logic. And this system was broken. This kitten should not be here. Every law of nature screamed it. He started spending less time on his crossword puzzle and more time on his porch watching. He noticed things others didn't. He saw the subtle tension in Sparky's posture, the way his eyes were always scanning, always alert. He saw how the kitten, despite the handouts, was growing thinner. The gloss on its coat was dulling. This wasn't a charming pet. It was a survivor, and it was clearly struggling. The question of the mother haunted him. Had she been hit by a car taken by a hunter illegally, or had she simply abandoned her kitten? He'd read online that abandonment was extremely rare. A mother bobcat's bond with her young was incredibly powerful. One crisp October afternoon, the kind of day where the sky was a brilliant aching blue, Ethan saw something that focused his vague worry into a sharp, clear mission. He was watching from his porch, binoculars in hand, when one of the neighbors, Mr. Jenkins, stopped his car to drop a small piece of a granola bar for Sparky. The kitten snatched it up, but instead of eating it, he looked around furtively. Then, with the scrap held firmly in his mouth, he trotted with surprising speed down the street. Not towards the woods, but in the opposite direction. Ethan's curiosity surged. He grabbed his cane, went inside to slip on his walking shoes, and set off. He kept his distance, walking on the opposite side of the street, using the parked cars and maple trees for cover. Sparky moved with a purpose Ethan had never seen before. He wasn't greeting or exploring. He was on a mission. He scurried past the last house on the lane and into a patch of overgrown municipal land that separated the neat suburb from a quiet access road. It was a forgotten place full of thorny brambles and wild grass. Ethan followed, his heart thumping a little faster. The ground was uneven, and he had to watch his footing. He lost sight of the kitten for a moment and swore under his breath. Then he saw a flicker of movement near a large culvert pipe that ran under the access road. He moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. There, half hidden by a curtain of wild Virginia creeper, was a large iron storm drain grate set into a concrete housing. He watched, holding his breath, as Sparky squeezed through a gap in the tangled weeds and disappeared from view. A moment later, he reappeared, his mouth now empty. He sat, licked his paw, and then, as if sensing he was being watched, his head snapped up and his eyes met Ethan's from across the clearing. There was no friendly chirp this time, just a flat, unreadable stare, before he melted back into the undergrowth. Ethan stood motionless for a long time, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. The trips, the food, the direction away from the safety of the woods. He was taking the food somewhere to someone. He knew what he had to do. The next day he prepared. He packed a small canvas bag with a powerful flashlight, a pair of leather work gloves, a bottle of water, and a container of shredded, unseasoned boiled chicken he'd cooked that morning. He felt like a detective on a stakeout. Eleanor would have found it amusing, this new sense of purpose that had seized him. He could almost hear her gentle, teasing voice. Arthur Peterson, saving the world one stray at a time. The thought brought a sad smile to his lips. He didn't have to wait long. Just after noon, Sparky made his appearance on Sycamore Lane. Ethan was ready. He walked out to the curb and placed a small pile of the boiled chicken on the grass. Sparky approached cautiously, his nose twitching. He ate half of the chicken, quickly, hungrily. Then, just as Ethan had predicted, he gathered the remaining shreds in his mouth, gave Ethan one last fleeting look, and set off on his now familiar path. This time Ethan was ready. He followed at a discreet distance, his resolve hardening with every step. He was going to find out the truth. He reached the clearing and watched as Sparky once again vanished behind the curtain of vines. Ethan gave him a few minutes before he approached the storm drain himself. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. He could hear the faint drip, drip, drip of water somewhere deep inside. Pulling on his work gloves, he knelt the motion, sending a sharp protest through his old knees. He carefully pushed aside the thick woody stems of the creeper. The iron grate was heavy and rusted, secured with thick bolts. There was no way he could lift it. But on one side, near the concrete edge, erosion had created a small, hollowed-out space partially obscured by weeds. It was just big enough for a small animal to squeeze through. It was Sparky's secret entrance. Ethan lay down on his stomach, the damp ground seeping through his trousers. He pressed his face close to the cold iron bars, the smell of rust and stagnant water filling his nostrils. He switched on his flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the oppressive darkness within. The beam landed first on an empty potato chip bag and a discarded soda can. Then he swept it further, and his heart stopped. At the back of the wide concrete drain about 15 feet in was a pathetic makeshift nest of dried leaves and grass. And lying in it was a bobcat, an adult female. Her coat was matted with mud and filth, and she was terrifyingly thin, her ribs starkly visible beneath her fur. One of her back legs was twisted at a grotesque, unnatural angle, swollen and dark with infection. Her eyes, a pair of luminous gold discs, stared back into the flashlight beam, not with aggression, but with a weary, soul-crushing exhaustion. She was too weak to even lift her head. Then Ethan saw more movement. Nestled against the mother's belly, seeking warmth and comfort she could barely provide, were two other kittens. They were much smaller than Sparky, their eyes barely open, squirming feebly. And at that very moment, Sparky trotted into the beam of light, dropped the shredded chicken at his mother's nose, and began to nuzzle her face, chirping softly. The whole devastating truth crashed down on Ethan with the force of a physical blow. Sparky wasn't a friendly neighborhood mascot. He was a hero. He was a desperate provider, a scout, a son, and a brother. His daily forays onto Sycamore Lane, his charming greetings, his acceptance of food, from the giant, frightening creatures of the human world, it wasn't for him. It was for them. He was risking his life every single day, braving cars and dogs and people to bring back scraps of sustenance for his dying mother and starving siblings. He was the only thing standing between his family and death. Ethan felt a hot sting behind his eyes. He slowly, carefully pulled himself back, his mind racing. The mother was in critical condition. The kittens were fading. He couldn't just leave them there, but he couldn't help them himself either. Trying to approach the mother, even in her weakened state, would be foolish and dangerous. He needed experts. He scrambled to his feet, his knees aching, his hands trembling slightly. He backed away from the drain, his eyes still fixed on the spot where he knew the tiny family was huddled in the dark. He pulled out his cell phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He didn't call 911 or animal control, who might not have the specific resources. His research from weeks prior had given him a better option. He found the number in his contacts and pressed call. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. Willow Creek Wildlife Sanctuary, this is Dr. Anya Sharma. My name is Ethan Hayes. Ethan said, his voice raspy with emotion. I live in Willow Creek off Sycamore Lane. I need your help. I found a bobcat family, the mother, she's badly hurt, and the kittens are very, very young. He explained the situation as quickly and clearly as he could. The drain, the broken leg, the heroic older kitten he called Sparky. Dr. Sharma listened patiently, asking sharp, specific questions. How big was the drain? How far was it from the road? Was the mother conscious? Mr. Hayes, you did exactly the right thing by calling us, she said, her voice reassuringly competent. And you did the right thing by not trying to intervene yourself. Can you stay near the location and guide us in without disturbing them further? We can be there in 30 minutes. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan said, his voice firm. The 30 minutes felt like an eternity. Ethan stood watch from a distance, a self-appointed guardian. He saw Sparky emerge once more, looking around as if confused that the flow of food had stopped. He just sat at the edge of the clearing, watching, waiting. Finally, a large white van with the Willow Creek Wildlife Sanctuary logo on its side pulled quietly onto the access road. Dr. Sharma, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out along with a young, muscular assistant named Leo. Ethan quickly explained the layout, pointing out the grate and the secret entrance. Dr. Sharma listened intently, her eyes assessing the scene. "Okay," she said, pulling on a thick pair of gloves. "This is a delicate situation. The mother will be terrified and in immense pain. Our priority is to get her sedated and secured with as little stress as possible. Leo, let's get the jab stick and the transport carrier ready." The rescue was a model of quiet efficiency. Leo and Dr. Sharma worked with practiced, seamless coordination. They decided against trying to squeeze through Sparky's entrance. Instead, Leo used a heavy crowbar to expertly pry up one corner of the massive iron grate, lifting it just enough to create a workable opening. Dr. Sharma lay on the ground just as Ethan had done and shined a tactical low-light flashlight into the drain. "I see them," she said softly. "Mom's alert, but she's not moving. The little ones are right with her." She prepared a sedative in a long, specialized pole syringe, the jab stick. "This will just put her to sleep, Mr. Hayes," she explained to Ethan, who was watching with his heart in his throat. "It'll be much safer for her and for us to move her that way." She carefully maneuvered the pole through the opening. There was a faint, distressed growl from the darkness, a sound of pure misery, then silence. "It's done," Dr. Sharma said, withdrawing the pole. "We'll give her a few minutes." During the wait, she turned her attention to the most important member of the family. "Where's the little hero?" she asked Ethan. Ethan pointed towards the edge of the woods. "He's over there hiding. He's been watching us." "Good, we can't forget him," Dr. Sharma said. Once the mother was fully sedated, the extraction began. Leo, using a humane catch pole with a wide, soft loop, carefully slipped it around the sleeping mother's shoulders. Gently, slowly, they slid her out of the drain and into the open air. Up close, her condition was even more shocking. She was skeletal, her fur patchy, her broken legs swollen to twice its normal size. Yet even in her sedated state, she exuded a kind of tragic dignity. They placed her carefully into a large ventilated carrier. Next were the kittens. Leo, being smaller, carefully lowered himself into the drain. A moment later, his voice echoed up. "I've got 2 of them. They're so tiny, barely hanging on." He passed them up to Dr. Sharma, who wrapped them in a warm fleece blanket and placed them in a smaller heated carrier. "Now for the last one," Dr. Sharma said, looking towards the woods. She walked slowly to the edge of the clearing and placed a small open trap cage on the ground, baiting it with the rest of Ethan's boiled chicken. "He knows the smell, and he'll want to be with his family. With any luck, his instincts will lead him right to us." They loaded the mother and the 2 tiny kittens into the van. Dr. Sharma turned to Ethan, her expression soft. "Her leg is a bad break, a compound fracture, and the infection is severe. But she's a fighter, and she had a son who was a fighter too. We'll do everything we can for them, Mr. Hayes, I promise." "What will happen to them?" Ethan asked, his voice thick. "If we can save her leg, we'll rehabilitate them all together as a family unit. The goal is always to return them to the wild where they belong. We'll take them to a protected state park far from any roads or neighborhoods." She gave him a card. "Call me in a couple of days. I'll have an update for you." As the van pulled away, Ethan stayed behind. He waited. He watched the small trap. An hour passed. Just as the sun began to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing, he saw a flash of movement. Sparky crept out from the undergrowth, his small body trembling. He sniffed the air, his nose leading him towards the chicken. He hesitated at the entrance to the trap, looked around the empty clearing for his mother, and then, his desire to be with his family overriding his caution, he walked inside. The trap door swung shut with a soft click. Ethan walked over, his heart aching with a strange mix of sadness and relief. He peered through the wire mesh. Sparky wasn't struggling. He was just sitting there, curled around the chicken, looking small and exhausted. His incredible lonely burden finally lifted. Ethan called Dr. Sharma. "I have him," he said. 2 days later, Ethan called the sanctuary. Dr. Sharma herself answered. "Ethan, I was hoping you'd call," she said, her voice warm. "I have good news. We had to amputate the mother's leg. The infection was just too advanced. There was no saving it, but she's a survivor. She's already eating, and her spirit is strong. Bobcats are incredibly resilient. They can hunt and thrive on 3 legs." Ethan's heart soared. And the kittens? The 2 little ones are still touch and go, but they're feeding from a bottle and getting stronger every hour. And Sparky, well, Sparky is a marvel. We reunited him with his mother as soon as she was out of surgery. The moment he saw her, he ran to her and hasn't left her side. He's the reason they're alive, Arthur. You both are. Over the next few months, Ethan became a regular visitor to the Willow Creek Wildlife Sanctuary. He'd bring donations, blankets, food, or just a small check, and Dr. Sharma would let him see the Bobcat family. He watched from a respectful distance as the mother, whom the staff had named Luna, at Ethan's quiet request, healed and learned to move with a powerful 3-legged grace. He watched as the 2 tiny kittens grew plump and playful, and he watched Sparky, who was finally able to be a kitten himself, wrestling with his siblings, no longer burdened by the weight of their survival. Sometimes when Luna was resting, she would look over at Ethan, and he could swear he saw a flicker of recognition in her wild, beautiful eyes, a silent acknowledgement, a thank you. Finally, on a bright, cool day in early spring, he got the call he'd been waiting for. "They're ready, Ethan," Dr. Sharma said. "We're releasing them tomorrow morning at the Shenandoah National Park." Ethan was there. He stood with the sanctuary staff on a ridge overlooking a vast, untouched valley teeming with life. They opened the carriers. The 2 smaller bobcats, now strong and sleek, bolted out without a second glance, eager for their new freedom. Luna paused at the edge of her carrier, sniffed the wild air, and then followed them, her 3-legged gait barely slowing her down. Only Sparky hesitated. He stood at the threshold, turning to look back at the humans. His eyes met Ethan's for a long, silent moment. The world stood still. It was the same look of profound, unnerving intelligence he'd seen on that first day on Sycamore Lane. It wasn't a greeting or a plea, it was a farewell. Then, with a flick of his short tail, he turned and bounded into the forest, a wild creature rejoining his wild family, disappearing into the life he was always meant to live. Ethan drove home with tears in his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. The quiet house didn't feel so empty anymore. That evening, he printed the best photo he had taken at the sanctuary, the mother Luna resting her head while her 3 kittens, including her brave little Sparky, slept soundly beside her. He framed it and placed it on the mantel right next to the silver frame photo of his own Eleanor. The routines of his life in Willow Creek slowly returned. He did his crosswords. He drank his coffee on the porch. But when he took his afternoon walk, he would always pause at the corner of Sycamore Lane. He'd look at the spot where a tiny, desperate bobcat had once greeted the world, and then his eyes would drift to the deep, silent woods. He never saw them again, but he knew they were out there running free. And he knew that in a quiet corner of his own heart, a space that had been lonely for too long was now and forever would be wonderfully, warmly, and gratefully full. This incredible story of Sparky, the heroic bobcat kitten, teaches us a profound lesson about empathy, observation, and the hidden resilience of nature. It reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. What seems like a simple, charming interaction might in fact be a desperate plea for help. Mr. Ethan Hayes' willingness to look beyond the obvious, to trust his instincts, and to take action saved an entire family. His journey highlights the importance of not only being kind to animals, but also understanding their natural behaviors and knowing when to seek professional help. True compassion often requires a deeper understanding and a willingness to step outside our comfort zones to make a real difference. What did you think of Sparky's incredible journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Video rating 9/10 for its inspiring message of courage and compassion.